The restaurant was bustling with life, a symphony of clinking glasses and soft chatter filling the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm golden light over pristine white tablecloths. It was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to be seen. And no one knew how to command attention quite like Claire Whitmore. Claire swept into the room as if she owned it, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Her tailored navy blue dress hugged her figure perfectly, and her diamond earrings sparkled under the chandelier's glow. She carried herself with an air of authority, her presence demanding respect, or at least acknowledgement, from everyone around her. The hostess greeted her warmly, leading her to a prime table by the window that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. This evening wasn't just any dinner. It was a celebration. Earlier that day, Claire had closed one of the biggest deals of her career, a multi-million-dollar merger that solidified her status as one of the most powerful women in the business world. To say she was proud of herself would be an understatement. As she settled into her chair, she couldn't help but feel invincible. This was her domain, her moment to shine. But Claire's confidence often bordered on arrogance, something those who knew her well were all too familiar with. She scanned the room, taking in the other diners, the businessmen in expensive suits, the couples on romantic dates, the servers weaving through the tables with practiced precision. Everything about this place screamed luxury, yet Claire still found ways to critique it silently. The flowers in the center of her table weren't arranged quite right. The lighting could have been brighter. Even the menu seemed uninspired compared to what she'd expected. Her gaze landed on the young woman approaching her table. She wore the restaurant's uniform, a crisp black skirt, white blouse, and apron tied neatly around her waist. Her name tag read, Tasha. Tasha moved gracefully despite the weight of the tray she carried, her dark skin glowing softly under the ambient light. There was a quiet dignity about her, though Claire barely noticed. All she saw was someone whose job was to cater to her every whim. "Good evening," Tasha said politely, offering a warm smile. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Claire didn't return the smile. Instead, she glanced at Tasha briefly before turning her attention back to the menu. "Water will do for now," she replied curtly, her tone dismissive. Tasha nodded, unfazed by the lack of warmth, and jotted down the order. As Tasha turned to leave, Claire's eyes followed her for a moment. Something about the waitress struck her, not in admiration but in mild irritation. Perhaps it was the way Tasha carried herself, standing tall despite her position. Or maybe it was simply because Claire felt entitled to more deference than she perceived she was receiving. Whatever it was, it planted a seed of frustration within her. When Tasha returned moments later with a glass of water, Claire decided to test her patience further. "Is this filtered?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she examined the glass. "I don't drink tap water." Tasha hesitated for only a fraction of a second before responding calmly. "Yes, ma'am. All our water is triple filtered." Claire narrowed her eyes, unsure whether to believe her. "Are you certain?" "Because I've heard complaints about places cutting corners." "I assure you, ma'am, we maintain the highest standards here," Tasha replied, her voice steady and professional. For a brief moment, Claire considered letting it go. But there was something about Tasha's composure that irked her. How dare this woman, this server, speak to her so confidently? In Claire's world, people like Tasha existed solely to serve, not to assert themselves. And so, without realizing it, Claire began setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon spiral out of control. Unbeknownst to her, however, fate had other plans. Somewhere in the shadows of the restaurant, someone watched silently, their eyes fixed intently on Claire. Someone who knew exactly who she was, and who held far more power than she could ever imagine. Claire's frustration simmered just beneath the surface as she flipped through the menu, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't used to being questioned or even subtly challenged by anyone, let alone someone in Tasha's position. To Claire, authority was something you either had or didn't, and Tasha clearly fell into the latter category. Or so Claire thought. Tasha returned moments later with a small notepad in hand, ready to take Claire's order. "Have you decided on anything yet?" she asked politely, her tone calm and professional. Claire glanced up briefly before returning her attention to the menu. "I assume your kitchen staff knows how to prepare a proper steak," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Medium rare, no seasoning mistakes this time." Tasha nodded patiently, ignoring the jab. "Of course. Anything else?" "Yes," Claire replied sharply, snapping the menu shut. "Make sure they don't overcook it. Last time I ate here, it was practically charred. And if that happens again, I'll expect you to fix it personally." There was a beat of silence as Tasha absorbed the comment. Her expression remained neutral, but inside, she felt a flicker of irritation. She'd worked hard to earn her spot at this restaurant, not just as a server but as someone who understood the value of respect. Still, she kept her composure. "I'll make sure the chef is aware of your preferences," she said evenly. Tasha walked away. Claire leaned back in her chair, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. On one hand, she enjoyed exerting control. It reminded her of the boardroom where she thrived under pressure. But there was something about Tasha's quiet confidence that unsettled her. It was almost as though the waitress wasn't intimidated by her wealth or status, and that unnerved Claire more than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, Tasha delivered Claire's order to the kitchen, exchanging a few words with the head chef. As she turned to leave, she noticed a familiar face sitting at a nearby table, a man in his late 50s dressed in a tailored suit. He smiled warmly at her, and Tasha gave him a quick nod in acknowledgement. They weren't related, but their connection went deeper than appearances might suggest. Back at Claire's table, the tension continued to build. When Tasha brought out the appetizer, a plate of seared scallops, Claire inspected it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Are these fresh?" she asked, picking up her fork without waiting for an answer. "They're flown in daily from the coast," Tasha explained, keeping her voice steady. "Our seafood is always fresh." Claire took a bite, chewing slowly as if searching for flaws. Finally, she set her fork down and looked up at Tasha. "It's passable," she said dismissively. "But I hope the entree is better." Tasha forced a polite smile. "I'll let the chef know." As Tasha stepped away, another patron entered the restaurant, a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence. Dressed in a sleek black dress, she moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Claire. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Claire felt a pang of recognition. But she quickly dismissed it, assuming the woman must simply be another guest. What Claire didn't realize was that the newcomer wasn't just any diner. She was Victoria Langston, a self-made billionaire, and one of the most influential figures in the city. More importantly, she happened to be Tasha's mentor, and someone who took great pride in nurturing talent regardless of background. Victoria made her way to a corner booth, where she signaled for the waiter. From her vantage point, she could see everything, including Claire's behavior toward Tasha. Victoria's expression hardened slightly as she observed the interaction. She'd built her empire on fairness and respect, and she had little patience for people who mistreated others based on perceived superiority. Unaware of the storm brewing in the background, Claire sipped her water, still focused on her own world. Yet somewhere deep inside, a nagging feeling began to creep in, a sense that tonight might not go exactly as planned. As the evening unfolded, the stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge Claire's assumptions and force her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Little did she know, the person she'd underestimated the most was about to reveal a side of themselves she hadn't anticipated. The main course arrived, and Tasha approached Claire's table with the same professionalism she had shown since the start of the evening. The steak was perfectly cooked, medium rare, just as Claire had requested, and plated with care. Yet before Tasha could even set the dish down, Claire began inspecting it like a detective searching for clues. "This doesn't look right," Claire said, her tone sharp. She poked at the meat with her fork, frowning. "It's unevenly cooked." Tasha paused, glancing at the plate. To anyone else, the steak looked flawless, a tender cut of premium, beef seared to perfection. But Claire's scrutiny wasn't about the food, it was about control. She wanted to find fault no matter how small because that gave her power in this interaction. "I'll have the chef check it," Tasha replied, calmly reaching for the plate. Her patience was remarkable, but inside she felt a growing sense of frustration. She knew exactly what Claire was doing, and while she refused to stoop to her level, it didn't mean she wasn't affected. As Tasha turned to take the plate back to the kitchen, Claire muttered under her breath loudly enough for Tasha to hear. "Some people just aren't cut out for high-end service." Tasha froze mid-step, her fingers tightening slightly around the tray. For a moment she considered turning around and confronting Claire, but years of discipline held her back. Instead, she took a deep breath and continued walking, determined not to let Claire's words get to her. But Claire wasn't done yet. When Tasha returned moments later with a replacement dish, Claire barely glanced at it. "This will do. For now," she said dismissively, waving Tasha away without so much as a thank you. By now, several patrons nearby had begun noticing the dynamic between the two women. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances while others tried to ignore the tension altogether. Among them sat Victoria Langston, who watched the entire exchange with increasing disapproval. Her usually warm demeanor had shifted into something colder, more calculating. From her booth, Victoria signaled for her waiter, pretending to ask for another glass of wine. In reality, she leaned closer and whispered discreetly, "Who is that woman causing trouble for Tasha?" The waiter hesitated, clearly aware of the situation but unsure how much to say. "Her name is Claire Whitmore," he replied quietly. "She comes here occasionally. Always demanding, but tonight seems worse than usual." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, her gaze returning to Claire. Something about the woman stirred a memory, perhaps an article she'd read or a business deal they'd nearly crossed paths on, but whatever it was, it only fueled her resolve to step in if necessary. Meanwhile, Claire remained oblivious to the attention she was drawing. She ate slowly, savoring each bite despite her earlier complaints, seemingly content with herself. Yet the nagging feeling she'd experienced earlier returned, stronger this time. It was subtle, a fleeting glance from another diner, a murmur among the staff, but it unsettled her all the same. Back in the kitchen, Tasha handed off the rejected steak to the chef, who frowned at the unnecessary criticism. "You handled that well," one of the sous chefs commented sympathetically. "She's impossible." Tasha shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "It's part of the job," she said simply. But privately she wondered why some people felt entitled to treat others so poorly. Still, she reminded herself of why she worked hard every day, not for customers like Claire, but for opportunities that lay ahead. Opportunities like the scholarship Victoria had helped her secure to attend culinary school. Unbeknownst to Claire, Victoria decided it was time to act. Rising from her seat, she smoothed her dress and made her way toward Claire's table. Her movements were deliberate, commanding respect even from those who didn't know her personally. As she approached, Claire finally looked up, startled by the sudden presence looming over her. "Ms. Whitmore," Victoria said coolly, her voice carrying authority. "May I have a word?" Claire blinked, taken aback. She recognized the name. It belonged to someone powerful, though she couldn't quite place where she'd heard it before. "Of course," she replied hesitantly, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. But Victoria didn't sit. Instead, she stood tall, her piercing eyes locking onto Claire's. "You've been treating my protégé rather poorly tonight," Victoria began, her tone icy yet controlled. "I wonder if you realize who you're speaking to, or perhaps more importantly, who you're speaking for." For the first time that evening, Claire found herself speechless. The tables had turned, and she suddenly realized she might be in over her head. Claire's mind raced as she stared up at Victoria, trying to process the sudden confrontation. The confidence that had carried her through the evening began to waver. She had always prided herself on being able to read people, on knowing exactly how much power she held in any given situation, but now, for the first time in years, she felt uncertain, Victoria didn't give Claire a chance to recover. Her presence commanded the room and her words cut through the air like a knife. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Tasha is not just another server. She's someone I've personally invested in because I see potential where others might overlook it." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She glanced around the restaurant, hoping for some kind of support or distraction, but everyone seemed to be watching silently. Even the other diners had turned their attention toward the unfolding drama, their curiosity piqued by Victoria's commanding tone. Victoria continued, her gaze unwavering. "I built my career on fairness and respect for everyone regardless of their position, and I expect those who enter my circle to uphold those same values." She paused, letting her words sink in before adding, "You've failed spectacularly tonight." For a moment, Claire thought about defending herself. After all, she was used to getting her way, whether through charm, intimidation, or sheer force of will. But something about Victoria's demeanor made her hesitate. This wasn't just a wealthy patron intervening on behalf of an employee. This was someone with real influence, someone whose name carried weight far beyond the walls of this restaurant. Finally, Claire managed to find her voice. I didn't realize," she stammered, her usual composure crumbling. "If I offended anyone, it certainly wasn't intentional." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Intentions are meaningless when the impact is so harmful," she replied sharply. "What you did tonight wasn't just rude, it was disrespectful, and frankly, it reflects poorly on you as both a person and a professional." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. For years, she had lived by a set of rules that prioritized results over relationships, success over sensitivity. Now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she realized how hollow those achievements felt without mutual respect. As the weight of Victoria's rebuke settled over her, Claire noticed Tasha standing nearby, holding a tray with quiet dignity. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time, Claire saw Tasha not as a subordinate but as a human being. There was strength in Tasha's gaze, a quiet resilience that Claire couldn't help but admire, even if it made her feel smaller in comparison. "I'm sorry," Claire said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't often she apologized, and when she did, it was usually calculated. But this time the regret in her tone felt genuine, if only because she knew she had been caught. Victoria studied her for a long moment, searching for sincerity. When she spoke again, her tone softened slightly, though it remained authoritative. "Apologies are a start, but they're not enough. Actions matter more than words. If you truly mean what you say, then prove it, not just here, but in every interaction moving forward." With that, Victoria turned and walked away, leaving Claire sitting alone at her table. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the tension lingered in the air. Patrons exchanged whispers, speculating about what had just transpired. While servers resumed their duties with renewed energy, Claire sat motionless, her untouched steak growing cold in front of her. For the first time in years, she felt small, and strangely, it was a feeling she couldn't shake. As she looked around the room, she realized that everyone was watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. In that moment, Claire understood that this night wasn't just about humiliation or embarrassment. It was about accountability and, perhaps, redemption. Whether she chose to rise to the occasion or retreat into denial remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: her life and her perspective would never be the same. Claire sat frozen at her table, the remnants of her dinner growing colder with each passing minute. The restaurant buzzed around her, but she felt as though she were trapped in a bubble, cut off from the world, forced to confront the weight of her own behavior. Victoria's words echoed in her mind, sharp and unrelenting, refusing to let her escape into denial. For years, Claire had prided herself on being untouchable, a force to be reckoned with in every room she entered. Yet now, stripped of her armor by someone who wielded power far greater than hers, she felt exposed and vulnerable. Her thoughts raced, replaying the evening's events over and over again. She saw herself clearly for the first time, not as the confident, successful woman she believed she was, but as someone who used arrogance and intimidation to mask insecurities. Her gaze drifted toward Tasha, who was busy assisting another table. There was no sign of anger or resentment in Tasha's demeanor. Instead, she carried herself with grace and professionalism, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Claire couldn't help but marvel at her composure. How did someone maintain such dignity in the face of blatant disrespect? And more importantly, why hadn't Claire recognized it sooner? Determined to salvage what little remained of the situation, Claire flagged down Tasha when she passed by. "Excuse me," she said softly, surprising even herself with the humility in her voice. Tasha stopped mid-step, turning to face Claire with polite curiosity. "Yes, ma'am?" she asked, her tone neutral. Claire hesitated, unsure how to begin. Apologies didn't come naturally to her, especially not ones that required genuine remorse. But Victoria's warning still rang in her ears. Actions matter more than words. Taking a deep breath, Claire pushed forward. "I owe you an apology," she admitted, meeting Tasha's eyes for the first time without condescension. "I treated you unfairly tonight, and I regret my actions." Tasha blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in Claire's tone. For a moment, she simply stared, processing the unexpected turn of events. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, her voice calm but measured. "It means a lot." Claire exhaled, feeling a flicker of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "If there's anything I can do to make this right." She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Offering compensation seemed shallow, almost insulting after everything that had happened. Tasha offered a small smile, sensing Claire's discomfort. "Just treat others with kindness moving forward," she said simply. "That's all anyone can ask for." The simplicity of the request struck Claire deeply. Kindness. It sounded so easy, yet it was something she had neglected for far too long. As Tasha walked away, Claire found herself reflecting on the choices that had led her here. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of what truly mattered: connection, empathy, and mutual respect. Across the room, Victoria observed the exchange from her booth, a faint smile playing on her lips. She hadn't expected Claire to apologize so openly, but it gave her hope that change was possible, even for someone as stubborn as Claire Whitmore. As the evening drew to a close, Claire paid her bill and prepared to leave. Before stepping out, she glanced back at Tasha one last time. Their eyes met briefly and Claire nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. Tasha returned the gesture with a warm smile, signaling forgiveness. Outside, the cool night air hit Claire like a wake-up call. For the first time in years, she felt lighter, as though shedding a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Walking toward her car, she resolved to make amends not just tonight, but in every aspect of her life. Little did she know, however, that this was only the beginning of her journey toward redemption. The next morning, Claire woke up with a heaviness in her chest that no amount of coffee or luxury could ease. The events of the previous night played on repeat in her mind: the sharp edge of Victoria's words, Tasha's quiet strength, and the uncomfortable truth staring back at her from the mirror. For years, she had built her life around ambition and control, but now those very foundations felt unstable, as if they might crumble under the weight of self-awareness. Determined to take action, Claire decided to start small. She began by calling the restaurant where everything had unraveled. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked to speak with Tasha. When Tasha came on the line, Claire swallowed her pride and said, "I wanted to thank you for your professionalism last night. You handled everything with grace, and I deeply regret how I treated you." Tasha paused, clearly surprised by the call. "Thank you for reaching out," she replied after a moment. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, and I appreciate your honesty." Claire felt a flicker of hope. "If there's anything I can do, anything at all, I'd like to make it right," she pressed, meaning every word. After a brief silence, Tasha responded thoughtfully, There is one thing, she said. Our community center is hosting a fundraiser this weekend for scholarships aimed at helping people pursue careers in hospitality. Your support would mean a lot. Claire agreed immediately, not because it was easy, but because it felt like the first step toward real change. That weekend she attended the event, mingling awkwardly among strangers who didn't know her reputation or care about it. For once she wasn't the center of attention, and oddly enough she found comfort in blending into the background. As the evening progressed, Claire listened intently to stories shared by scholarship recipients, including Tasha. Each narrative highlighted resilience, hard work, and dreams bigger than circumstances. By the end of the night, Claire realized just how narrow her worldview had been. Success wasn't just about climbing ladders, it was about lifting others along the way. Meanwhile, Victoria kept a watchful eye on Claire's transformation. Though she hadn't expected an apology, she appreciated the effort. One afternoon, she invited Claire to lunch at a quiet cafe downtown. Over steaming cups of tea, Victoria spoke candidly. "Change isn't easy," she said, her tone softer than before. "But I see potential in you if you're willing to embrace it." Claire nodded earnestly. "I want to do better," she admitted. "Not just for myself, but for everyone I've let down." Victoria smiled faintly. "Then start by listening more and speaking less. Sometimes the greatest power comes from empowering others." Inspired by Victoria's guidance, Claire threw herself into learning. She attended workshops on leadership and empathy, read books about systemic inequality, and sought advice from mentors outside her usual circle. Slowly but surely, her perspective shifted. She began seeing people, not positions, and understanding their struggles beyond surface-level interactions. At work, Claire implemented new policies aimed at fostering inclusivity and respect within her company. At first, some colleagues raised eyebrows, skeptical of her sudden shift. But as they witnessed her consistency, many came to admire her dedication to growth. Though progress was slow, Claire knew she couldn't undo years of harm overnight. What mattered most was that she was trying. And for the first time in her life, she understood that trying was enough. Little did she know, however, that her journey was far from over. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a path paved with challenges yet to come. Months passed, and Claire's transformation became undeniable. The woman who once walked into rooms demanding respect now entered them seeking connection. Her colleagues noticed the change, not just in her actions, but in her attitude. She listened more intently during meetings, valued input from employees at every level, and championed initiatives aimed at creating a fairer workplace. Though whispers of skepticism lingered among some peers, most couldn't deny that Claire was different and better. One evening, Claire received an invitation to a gala honoring Victoria Langston for her contributions to mentorship and community development. It wasn't the kind of event Claire would have attended before. She'd always avoided gatherings where she didn't hold center stage. But this time, she accepted without hesitation, not because she sought recognition, but because she wanted to show gratitude. The gala was held in a grand ballroom adorned with twinkling lights and elegant floral arrangements. As Claire entered, she spotted Tasha across the room, dressed in a stunning gown and standing beside Victoria. Their bond was evident, a testament to the impact of mentorship and mutual respect. Claire approached them cautiously, unsure how she'd be received. "Claire," Victoria greeted her warmly, extending a hand. "I'm glad you're here." "Thank you for inviting me," Claire replied sincerely. Turning to Tasha, she added, "And thank you for everything." Tasha smiled, her expression softening. "You've come a long way," she said simply. "That takes courage." The compliment caught Claire off guard, bringing tears to her eyes. For so long, she had equated strength with dominance, but now she understood true courage lay in vulnerability and growth. Later that night, Victoria took the stage to deliver her acceptance speech. As she spoke about the importance of lifting others up, she glanced toward Claire, acknowledging her journey publicly. "Change isn't easy," Victoria said, her voice resonating through the room. "But when we choose to grow, we inspire those around us to do the same. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat as applause filled the air. For the first time, she realized her redemption wasn't just personal, it was communal. By choosing to become someone worthy of respect, she had unknowingly inspired others to reflect on their own behaviors. One day, while volunteering at the community center where Tasha had once spoken, Claire found herself surrounded by young adults eager to learn. They asked questions, shared dreams, and reminded her why change mattered. In their hopeful faces, she saw reflections of herself, not the person she used to be, but the person she was becoming. As she left the center that evening, Claire paused outside, looking up at the stars. She thought about how far she'd come, and how much further she still had to go. Redemption wasn't a finish line, it was a continuous process. But for the first time in years, she felt at peace, with herself, with others, and with the world. And somewhere, watching silently, Victoria smiled. She knew Claire's journey wouldn't always be smooth, but she also knew one thing for certain. The woman who had once